Lake Ashton was the crown jewel of the county. Crystal clear water, private docks, luxury lake houses stretching along the shoreline like a catalog of American success. Every property inside the gated community was governed by the Lake Ashton Preservation HOA, a board that claimed to protect the integrity and uniformity of the neighborhood. In reality, the HOA had become something else entirely. At the center of the story stood Evan Caldwell, a reserved man in his early 50s who owned one of the largest lakefront homes in the community. His house wasn't just expensive, it was extraordinary. A custom-built $10 million lake house, designed with floor-to-ceiling glass, natural stone, and a private dock extending into the deepest part of the lake. Evan rarely spoke at HOA meetings. He rarely complained. He paid his dues on time and kept his property pristine. To most residents, he was simply the quiet owner of that incredible house by the water. What no one on the HOA board bothered to learn was who Evan really was. The conflict began over something small, insultingly small, a $5,000 assessment fee. The HOA claimed the fee was for lake shoreline reinforcement, a project that, according to Evan's records, had already been paid for 2 years earlier. Evan reviewed the documents, confirmed the duplicate charge, and politely requested clarification. The HOA president, Marilyn Kessler, did not appreciate being questioned. Marilyn ran the board like a personal kingdom. She believed money equaled authority, and authority meant obedience. Anyone who challenged her decisions was labeled difficult or non-compliant. Evan's request for clarification quickly turned into a demand, then a warning, then a threat. The HOA sent a certified letter stating that if the $5,000 fee was not paid within 30 days, the board would pursue corrective action against Evan's property. Evan responded with documentation, bank records, previous invoices, proof of payment. Marilyn dismissed it all. "The board has voted," she wrote back. "Compliance is mandatory." Evan chose not to escalate. He assumed logic would prevail. Didn't. 31 days later, Evan was traveling out of state for business when his phone began buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. One message stood out. "There at your house with construction equipment." Security camera alerts followed. Evan pulled up the live feed on his phone and felt his stomach drop. Heavy machinery sat in his driveway. Workers in reflective vests were tearing apart his landscaped shoreline. His private dock was being dismantled. Stonework that had taken months to design was being jackhammered into rubble. The HOA had authorized corrective demolition, all over $5,000. By the time Evan returned 2 days later, the damage was irreversible. His dock was destroyed. The reinforced shoreline was compromised. Rare imported stone had been shattered and hauled away. Millions of dollars in damage, inflicted deliberately. Marilyn stood at the site that afternoon, clipboard in hand, surveying the destruction like a victorious general. "This is what happens when homeowners refuse to comply," she announced loudly to anyone listening. Evan didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply walked through the ruins of his property in silence. Neighbors watched from a distance, shocked but afraid to speak. Everyone knew the HOA had gone too far, but no one dared challenge Marilyn openly. That evening, Evan placed a single phone call, not to a lawyer, not to insurance, but to his executive assistant. "Pull the Lake Ashton property records," he said calmly. "All of them." What the HOA didn't know was that Lake Ashton wasn't just a neighborhood to Evan. It was an investment, one they had gravely misunderstood. As the sun set over the damaged shoreline, Evan stood on the edge of the lake, looking out over the water he now barely recognized. The HOA thought they had made an example of him. They had no idea they had just exposed themselves. The emergency HOA meeting was called less than a week later. The board believed it would be a formality, a chance to justify their actions, issue warnings, and remind residents who was in charge. Marilyn sat confidently at the head of the table, convinced she had enforced the rules flawlessly. The meeting room filled quickly. Every homeowner showed up. Evan arrived last. He took a seat quietly, carrying a slim folder and a calm expression that made Marilyn uneasy for the first time. The meeting began as expected. Marilyn launched into a prepared statement about maintaining standards and protecting property values. Then Evan stood. "I'd like to speak," he said evenly. Marilyn sighed dramatically. "Mr. Caldwell, this matter is closed." Evan nodded. "For you, maybe. For the law, no." He walked to the front of the room and connected his laptop to the projector. The first slide appeared. Lake Ashton Property Holdings ownership map. Gasps rippled through the room. The map showed parcel after parcel highlighted in blue, nearly the entire shoreline, including the land beneath the HOA's private roads, docks, and common areas. Evan spoke calmly. "Over the last 12 years, my company acquired the undeveloped land surrounding this lake. Quietly, legally, through shell holdings you never bothered to investigate." Marilyn's smile faded. "The HOA," Evan continued, "leases access rights, easements, and infrastructure from entities I control." A board member stammered. That can't be right." Evan clicked to the next slide. "HOA lease agreements, default risk analysis." "You destroyed my property without legal authority," Evan said, "which constitutes trespass, destruction of assets, and breach of lease." The room went silent. Marilyn stood abruptly. "You can't intimidate us with paperwork." Evan looked at her, not angrily but with finality. "I'm not intimidating you," he said. "I'm terminating your access." Another slide appeared. "Notice of lease termination, effective immediately." The implications hit instantly. Without land access rights, the HOA had no authority. No roads, no docks, no enforcement power. One homeowner whispered, "That means the HOA is finished." Evan nodded. "Correct." The board panicked. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew. Marilyn demanded order, but no one listened anymore. Evan wasn't finished. "The demolition performed on my property," he continued, "triggered a clause allowing me to reclaim common land. Effective immediately, the HOA board is dissolved. Any further enforcement actions will be considered unlawful." Marilyn's face turned pale. "You did this on purpose," she hissed. "No," Evan replied. "You did." Within days, the fallout was complete. The HOA was legally dissolved. Board members were held personally liable. Insurance refused coverage due to unauthorized demolition. Marilyn was sued individually. Residents voted to form a voluntary neighborhood association. The destroyed dock and shoreline were rebuilt, better than before, funded entirely by the settlement. Marilyn resigned from public life. She sold her home at a loss and left Lake Ashton quietly, avoiding eye contact with neighbors who once feared her. As for Evan, he restored his lake house not as a statement but as closure. On a quiet evening months later, Evan stood on his rebuilt dock, watching the sun reflect across the water. Neighbors waved as they passed, no longer bound by intimidation or fear. The lake was peaceful again.